Welcome to the round 12 edition of the Brisbane Lions Fancast with Dom Fay and Mike Whiting. How do we beat Freo?
Well, I don't know. If we could come up with a few ideas, I'm sure we'd be getting paid a bit more money than we are at the moment, Dom. But it's going to be tough, isn't it? Like Freo, particularly in the last month or so, have really put themselves forward as a flag favourite, I think. We saw Sydney have vaulted to flag favouritism, and the last team that did well against Sydney was Fremantle. I mean, Fremantle drew with them at the SCG, and we've seen recently how well that form stacks up because not many teams are coming within a bull's roar of the Swan. So they're a great defensive unit, Fremantle. They've done it without some of their best players. I think they're a team that Brisbane can actually look to and get some hope from because they haven't had Pavlich. They missed Fife for a couple of games. They missed Hill for a couple of games. They haven't had Sandilands. But they've just got a terrific defensive attitude, haven't they? And it might not be a very exciting brand of football, but it's a winning brand. So you've just got to match them in those areas, don't you? And Jonathan Brown speaking earlier in the week saying the same thing. You've got to match their defensive intensity. You can't go over there and expect to get a bucket load of possessions and goals. You've just got to be prepared for a scrap. And they're not a high scoring team. They're not going to run away from you generally.
Yeah.
You've just got to keep it close. I mean, that's the only way. If they get 5 goals in front, that's shut the gate. I mean, that's as good as 10 goals down to anyone else. So you've just got to keep it close and hope you can nip them at the back end. But there's obviously a lot of personnel problems at the Lions as far as injuries and suspensions go. So still no Dan Merritt or Jonathan Brown through suspension and guys out with injury, important players, as we've touched on in previous episodes.
I'm hoping to see, when the teams are announced on Thursday night, Mitch Golby's name in as well, because I think he significantly adds to our defence. He's probably one of the best tacklers in the team. And you just had to watch the Essendon match to see how great some of his tackles can be, how he can just completely shut down the opposition. Yeah,
that was, I think you touched on it in that, as we followed up that match, that was probably his best defensive game at the club. So, and we'd seen little glimpses of we've seen glimpses of his attacking prowess last year even. Like he's quite a good kick. He's developed into a very good kick. But that Essendon game, as you touched on at the time, I think I'm going off memory here, and I'm sure someone will call up and prove me wrong, but he had something like 8 or 10 tackles. He had a lot of tackles in that game, and
I think it was 10.
Yeah, and it was just a side that we'd probably seen a little bit of, but that was the exclamation point on it to show us that that's what he could bring to that back half. So you need 18 and 21 and 22 of those guys on the weekend, don't you? Because there's when you haven't got the ball, you've got to work so hard against Freo. And I guess we saw an upset against Essendon, and I was made to look like an idiot on here when I didn't pick him, and I thought Essendon was going to win by 6 or 7 goals, and that was quite foolish as it turned out in hindsight.
Actually, do you think this would be beating Freo in Perth? Would that be bigger than beating Essendon in Melbourne?
Undoubtedly.
Yep.
No question, I think.
I think I agree.
And again, we don't want to talk about hindsight, but I guess when we do look back at that Essendon match, they have had a few off-field. There's obviously a lot of stuff going on off-field. We don't know how that's affecting them. And that was still an unbelievable victory. For me, that was enormously against the odds, and I even said I think that's the best win since the final in 2009. Best win on the road since probably West Coast in 2007. That was an incredible victory. So we don't want to take away from that, but this would be just a slight step higher, I think.
I think you're right, because Freo just don't lose at home. So to win a game like that would be massive. And it just comes down to pressure. We won that Essendon game on our pressure. We stuck with them all day. So it's going to be a fascinating game on Saturday, and I'm not quite sure what we're going to be here chatting about next Wednesday.
I'll tell you what we have seen from the Lions, Dom, is that and I know it was a focus going to that game. You can normally tell from them within the first 10 minutes. That was their focus, that game, first 10 minutes, and you could see the Lions were on, and they kept that up the whole game, whereas conversely, we've seen so many times this season the first 10 minutes has been poor, and that's filtered its way through the whole match. So you'll get a fair indication quite early, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. So fingers crossed that we can bring our best footy on Saturday and maybe shock Freo and pull off upset of the season.
Be good, wouldn't it? Because then we'll have Brown and Merritt back the following week. Possibly Daniel Rich. Who knows? Like
it's momentum.
The troops start coming back then, don't
they? Yeah, the cavalry returns.
They do. So let's. It's not about crossing our fingers. It's just let's see a good performance.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to chat with list manager Rob Kerr next on the Fancast.
The Brisbane Lions official club app lets you have all your Lions content in the palm of your hand. News, videos, scores, stats, player profiles and more. And it's free. Plus, if you're a Telstra NextG customer, it's unmetered, so there's no data charges. The Brisbane Lions app, available right now for both iPhone and Android.
Joining us on the Brisbane Lions Fancast today is list manager Rob Kerr to chat about all things our list. I want to kick it off with a question, Rob. Firstly, welcome to the show. But we've got 3 stars out of contract: Pierce Hanley, Matthew Leuenberger, and obviously Daniel Rich. Can you give us any update at all, any exclusive on the Fancast today about how that's tracking along?
Okay, well, as far as those 3 players go, they're all managed by Paul Connors, and to be fair to say, I've spent a lot of time discussing those players with Paul Connors over recent weeks. I think with Matthew Leuenberger, we're very, very close to getting a deal, and I think we're pretty, we're not far away with Daniel, and we've been talking about Pierce and working through that one as well. So I'd like to think that in the next couple of weeks, even within the next week for one of them, there'd be some positive news.
That's great news for all the Lions listeners out there, Rob, for sure. Can you just tell us a little bit about that negotiation process? As you said there, there's the 3 guys are with the one manager. Do you have to take it one at a time, or do you go in there and try and negotiate 3 contracts all at once?
Oh, well, Paul's he obviously takes instructions from each of his clients, so he's got an obligation to each individual. We'll try and do them pretty much in the same sort of sit-down sessions, but you'll get to different points in each discussion, and in some cases it's the end result is a little bit of a function of how close we are, how close the club is in terms of reflecting the instructions that he's been given from his client. So we don't package them up, if you like. We do negotiate each one individually, and I suppose those 3 players are currently, you'd have to consider them in our top bracket of most valuable players on our list. So there's not going to be massive discrepancies across the 3 of them, but each has his own. They play different roles. You've got to consider what does each player, what would be his value in the market, what's his value to the club, and when you work through that, and they can be quite lengthy, these negotiations. Obviously, my job is to try and get the best deal for the club, and Paul's job is to try and get the best deal for the player. So sometimes it takes a little bit of time and effort to get to that middle ground where we can both walk away happy that we've done the job for each party which we represent.
There's also a bunch of other players out of contract, as there are every year now. I'm not 100% sure on this list, but I think players like Dane Zorko, Mitch Golby, Billy Longer, Elliot Yeo. Have you advanced far in discussions with other players, or have you been focusing on these 3 first?
No, look, all those players you spoke about have had discussions with their managers. We're probably a bit further advanced with Dane than some of them. The way it plays out too is, particularly with younger players, they often like to see how their season progresses. I suppose if you look at it from their point of view, if you're playing regular senior football, you a more valuable commodity than if you're not. So sometimes younger players will like to wait a little longer before they feel they're in a position to commit, and that's often a function of them getting a sense of their worth to the team in terms of, are they a regular senior player, are they a player who's in and out of the team, or are they a player who still has a fair bit of development time in front of him in the NAFL before he breaks into becoming a regular player. So whilst we as a club can go and talk to players and put offers forward, you can't force anyone to sign. They've obviously got to feel that they're at a stage where they're happy to talk about an agreement which they'd be happy to move forward with.
We can't be remiss of us to not mention Buddy Franklin. The club's obviously expressed an interest in him, the fact that he's out of contract, and that, hey, I guess Brisbane's been chasing a big forward for a while. So have you chatted with Liam Pickering, who's Buddy's manager, or is that advanced, or do you leave that till later in the season, or whereabouts?
I've chatted to Liam about a number of players that he's got on his list. Again, as I said, you do sit down with all the managers and work through the players on their list. Someone like like Buddy, well, that's a discussion that goes at a level higher than just my good self, I've got to say. That's a whole of club type of decision, that one. So there's an awful lot involved in those sorts of in recruiting those sorts of players. I mean, Buddy's one that his management's indicated that they want to hold things off until the end of the year. But as a club, you've got to do your work up front, and the first question you've got to ask is, well, can you fit a player like that in? And to get to the answer to that, you've really got to progress your own list as far as recontracting and the like goes. I mean, he's obviously one of a group of free agents who would be of interest to most clubs. And as you do with all that bracket of players, you continue to keep in touch with the player agents and see where the player's at and what his thoughts are. And then as a club, you've got to do your work, whether it be Franklin or Thomas or any number of the free agents. There's a fair bit of work that has to go on behind the scenes to satisfy yourselves that you're in a position where you can bid for players of that calibre.
Well, thanks for joining us on the Fancast today, Rob. I know that fans absolutely love the insight that you give through your trade wraps and your draft wraps, and also through this today. And I know everyone thinks you're doing a great job, so all the best with maintaining the list, and we'll have another chat to you a bit later in the year as the off-season recruitment period gets a little closer.
Okay, no, it's a pleasure, guys. Thanks for your interest.
This week, the Lions reserves come up against Labrador. It's Saturday at 1:30 at Labrador. It does, quite nicely precede the Freo game, which starts at 4:40, which is the seniors over in Perth. So great Saturday afternoon of footy if you're a Lions fan and can get down the coast, I reckon. Both should be interesting games for the club. The reserves had their first loss in a long time just before the bye, and the seniors have a very tough challenge, Mike.
Yeah, they sure do. The reserves came up against a pretty handy Suns outfit a couple of weeks ago, so they'll be looking to get back on track. And as we've already touched on the seniors plenty earlier in the show, but big weekend for both teams, isn't it?
Definitely. So that's this week for the Lions. We'll catch you next week on the Fancast. For now, that's us. Bye.
See ya.